Welcome to another episode of Holy Unapologetic. We are your hosts, Marqus and Ayce. We got a very special guest here with us today. Ayce, would you do us the honors of introducing us?
Yeah, so this is Melisa. She's a publisher and a coach. And we got to know each other a few months ago just by talking about actually writing a book. And so we're going to write a book together, Embracing Eros. And we're super excited about what that's going to look like. I think there's going to be roughly 20 authors. It's a multi-author book. And she's actually published, I don't know, how many books now? 7, 8?
I've been involved in quite a few. Hope itself has published 3, but I've been
Okay.
involved in a lot. I ran another publishing company before this one, so
Great.
yeah.
Yes. What are the other books that you've published?
Yeah, we just did Call of the Mystical Mountain, which was also a multi-author, and that was for people who have had experiences with Mount Shasta.
Okay.
So everybody who has had like spiritual experiences with Mount Shasta. And before that, we did Manifesting Magical Moments. And then we've had a solo author as well. He wrote a book called Horribly Lovely, which is like searching fearless, his relationship with relationships and love addiction. And he just bore his soul about his affairs and just everything. I mean, it is the most raw, beautiful, and people go into that book and they either love it or hate it. That's kind of the tone. That's what I go for. I really want people to share their authentic truth. I think that that's where the most healing comes from, is we're just like completely honest.
Yeah, the
I love
next
that.
the next book that we're co-authoring together is going to be really raw. It's going to be vulnerable. The stories are going to be very relatable to other people's life stories as well, which is why I'm so excited about what we're writing.
Excellent. So I guess for Melissa, how did you get into publishing, writing, this whole world?
Yeah, I have been an intimacy coach for the past 7 years, and I got into I kept trying to figure out how to get published and how to write my own book, and it felt like this giant obstacle. Like I was just like, wow, like everything that I learned made me realize how much more there was to learn. And I even hired a writing coach at one point and fired. That was the first coach I ever fired because I was like, this is just not what I need. She was great. It just wasn't what I wanted. And I
Mm.
felt like, what is the point if I do all this writing and then I don't have any way to publish? I don't know how to get published. And so then it was 2021 that I found a company that does what I do now, a hybrid publisher, and went into my first multi-author book. And it's so crazy because when I look back, I'm like, oh my gosh, if there was anything that I could have done right out the gate as a coach, I would have done that, because I felt always very alone as an online business owner. Just like I felt like I was pushing a boulder up the side of a mountain all by myself. And I didn't know how to refer. I didn't know how to do collaborative partnerships. Like I just didn't know any of that stuff. And then I got into this group book with like-minded people, and I still have referral partners from that book from 2021. So it really just changed my whole perspective and was so amazing, to hit best-selling author. That one actually was a USA Today best-selling author. And we did a retreat with it and different things. I was like, oh my goodness, this is my thing, because I love writing. I've always known I've loved writing. The crazy thing is that, yeah, then I got invited to be the CEO of a publishing house like a few years later. So that was all of 2023. And so there I got to really learn the ins and outs, and I got to learn a lot about what to do and a lot about what not to do. Particularly, I got to see how much smoke and mirrors and kind of there's a lot of fear right now in the publishing industry because Amazon and the internet have drastically changed the industry. I mean, just 20 years ago, you had the Good Old Boys Club, and that was how you became published. And so if you weren't talking about what they wanted you to be talking about, you didn't get published. That was it. And then we have internet, and we have blogging, and we have podcasting, and we have all these things. And we have Amazon that comes out as this international printer. And suddenly, like, anyone can be a published author. And that is so amazing, right? Like, voices like your guys's that can be heard now, because before they weren't being heard. And but it created a new challenge, which is the last statistic I heard, and this is a rough, I don't think that there's anybody officially saying what the numbers are, but 20,000 new books a day are uploaded onto Amazon.
That doesn't even surprise me.
Less than 5% of books sell more than 1,000 copies in the lifetime of the book itself. So we've got a new challenge, right? So for the traditional publishing houses, they're scrambling for sure. For hybrid publishers, we're really faced with this, like, do I be honest and transparent about the numbers, about what the industry really looks like? Or do I try and, like, make it seem like we're selling a bunch of books and sort of schmooze people over, which I see kind of a lot of. So that's when I decided to start my own.
And can you define hybrid? Does that mean kind of digital physical? What is the hybrid part?
Yeah, hybrid. No, that's a great question. Hybrid means there's kind of three routes that you can go with publishing. You can go with traditional publishing still. So you would write a manuscript and then you'd submit it to several different publishing houses and kind of wait for somebody to say, yes, we want your story. Then there's self-publishing, which is where you just YouTube everything and do it yourself, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's me, which is a hybrid publisher. So we bring together a bunch of experts for you, and then we help you self-publish. We also, with this multi-author book, technically I am the publisher, but if I'm helping a solo author, I'm actually helping them self-publish. Like, they're putting it onto their Amazon account. They're in charge of all the royalties and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah.
I love that. I'm a writer myself, and I think the only thing I like more than writing is watching master classes about writing, webinars about writing, classes about writing. And one that drove me crazy was actually David Baldacci was talking about, like, oh, you guys have it so easy these days. Back in my day, we had to go into the office and pitch our book and all this stuff. You can just put it on the internet. And it's like, but everyone can put it on the internet. That's the problem. So exactly what you just talked about is what can be so hard. You know, anyone can start a podcast. I'm so grateful for our little corner of the internet here, and hopefully we can reach more people. And I really believe in it. So like that matters no matter how many people see it. But that can be something really terrifying about publishing, because it's like, I do know, I think, how I could do that. But that sounds like you were really able to help a lot with that bridge. So how would you kind of summarize your differentiation, or kind of your kind of core statement for your particular publishing company as how you stand out from the market in that way?
Well, kind of as I've already hinted to, integrity is really high up there. I also think that all of our authors feel really held through the process. So we're not here to try to shape anybody's story to fit any kind of agenda. We just want people to really feel like it's a transformational experience to write, especially if you're writing from like your depths, from your core. And so we believe that every person's story and experiences have healing codes kind of already embedded in them. And the more authentic and raw you're willing to be with your story, the more people can feel of that energy and can feel those healing codes from you. So we do that piece in terms of like how we're supporting the writing process and stuff. Certainly we have experts with developmental editing and copy editing and graphic design and formatting. And then we have helpers on the back end with Amazon ads and other kinds of suggestions in terms of podcast guesting or speaking or etc. But I think too, from what I see in the industry, there's not a lot of support after the book has launched. And so we build in a lot of training and coaching around how do you weave, especially if you're a business owner, how do you weave the leveraging of this book in with your existing marketing so it's not super overwhelming, but that you're actually leveraging the book to help people understand your level of expertise. And then, like, it's amazing, right? It's great for your existing clients because you're giving them a packet of your energy and it's on their coffee table for life after that until they decide to chuck it or whatever they decide to do with it, right? Or hand it off to someone else. Like, that's so powerful. That's something that the internet can't really provide. It's so tangible. But then it's also great to draw in new eyeballs as well. So yeah, we really do. We even encourage our authors to, Ayce hasn't gotten to this stage of our process yet, but we'll actually, I think on our next calls when we're talking about this, we'll talk about, okay, put yourself 12 months out past the launch date. And like, what do you see yourself doing that would bring you joy to still be talking about this book, leveraging this book, and then build your plan backwards from there. So, and we're just talking about that all the time, because I think a lot of people, especially with the multi-author books, that kind of became a thing. And a lot of people will go through that process and then say, then the book launched and it felt like crickets or something happened after that, which, you know, a lot of people just aren't taught how to leverage the book.
Mm-hmm. So how about you, Ace? What are you excited about in this process? What have you learned so far? What are you looking forward to?
Yeah. Well, I'm actually more excited about the partnership that I've created with Melisa because I feel like her story has been really just very similar to mine in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of correlation between even Marcus, your story, and her story, as far as being deeply in religion and living a lifestyle in this framework, and then choosing to step away from that or change our theological ideas around this world. And so actually, Melisa, I would love for you to share a little bit about your story, about who you were before you started publishing and kind of where you're at today.
Yeah, thank you. Now we could take it out of some of the headier business stuff and into the more heart side of stuff, because it's kind of crazy since I said yes to being a publisher, which was very scary. For some reason, I had publishers in this kind of other category. As an online business owner, I was like, I can't do that. And then learning the process and everything, like, yeah, a lot has changed, and giving other people the opportunity to share their story. I think maybe some part of that has helped me feel more empowered to just make whatever changes I feel called to make. So, because right before I started, so as I said yes to becoming the CEO of the publishing house, it was about 4 or 5 months into that I finally decided to leave the Mormon church. So that was just middle of 2023. It was really recent. Yeah. I joined the Mormon church when I was 18. I was raised by Holy Roller Christian family members. So joining the Mormon church was also super brave, just like leaving the Mormon church was also super brave, because my family, crazy stuff happened at that time. Like, people would, my aunts would say to me, if your grandpa knew, he'd be rolling over in his grave right now, like that you're joining the Mormon church. I had half the town that I lived in kind of come out of the woodworks and like talking to me about how this church is a cult, but all of Christianity's not. And I ultimately concluded in my studies, like, seems like all of Christianity is, but I was already sold on that. So I was like, well, well then, and I even had an aunt go to the church that I had been going to. It was Assemblies of God Church. And on the night that I was getting baptized into the Mormon church, she was holding a prayer group for me, for my soul, because I was joining the Mormon church. And she came away from that and said, I understand now that this is all as it's meant to be, because one day you're going to leave and you're going to take millions with you, which I hated at the time. I still hate. I'm like, I don't need.
No pressure.
So that's what it was like when I joined. I think I had a really rough childhood growing up. And so Christianity became the only consistency in my life. It became the only place where my emotions were welcome, was up on the altar crying to Jesus, and asking for repentance and asking, to be saved or whatever. And then joining the Mormon church felt like, oh my God, those people aren't broken though. Like, look at them. They're all bright and shiny and they have these happy, smiling children. And like, they seem to have it all figured out. They clearly have, careers and, good family life. And I think I just thought, like, I felt so broken, like, because of my background and my parents and stuff. I thought, if I don't do this, I don't think I'll have a chance. Like, I don't think I'm capable of doing life. And so, um, uh, yeah, which I guess I want to just pause there, because I think so many of us, we have that moment in Christianity where, whether you were born and raised or whatever, it's like that moment of conviction where you think what you're receiving is like, now I know this is so true. And instead, it's all this other messed up stuff. At least for me, it was, of like,
Mm.
maybe, maybe now I can rest. Maybe now I have like insurance on life. Maybe now I could just embrace peace, because I know that I'm not going to be myself. I'm going to be whatever this is telling me to be. And so things are going to work out now. Um, so sad. So, yeah, 2006, which was right before I graduated high school, joined the Mormon church. Every step of the way, I kind of relate the Mormon church to like a narcissistic abuser. It's kind of like that relationship. So there was a lot of love bombing for me as an investigator. That's what they call you when you're like learning and stuff. And then as a new convert, that's what they call you in your first couple of years. So there was always a new benchmark for me to hit. First you get baptized, then you go through the temple, then you find your lifelong or eternal partner, and you get married, and then you have children. And like, especially as a woman, that was the trajectory. So I was planning to become a doctor. And by the time I met my husband, I had, I think, a year and a half left of my bachelor degree before I could, go on and do med school and stuff. But in meeting him and stuff, I just got even more committed to this path. And you're really taught to be a stay-at-home mom. Like, that's the ideal. You could have a job, but you're not ever going to be living like the ultimate Mormon life if you do that as a woman. And so I decided to just graduate with my bachelor and give up that career dream. And then it was interesting, because it was like, once I had the baby, there was no other benchmarks for me to pass, and the love bombing all just kind of stopped. I didn't know that was what was happening, but it was like, oh. And then I watched my kids being raised in the church, and they were never love bombed. They were kind of always under the eye of scrutiny. When they're real little and they're innocent, it's like, okay. But like, they start to approach age 8, and Mormons teach us the age of accountability. And suddenly all the older people, it felt like, we're just kind of like, are you going to make the right choices? Are you measuring up? Are you going to be perfect? Are you going to do all the things? And the primary songs are like, just embedding these teachings of like, I'm not enough, but good thing I have Jesus. And and then they're like, marching practically to these like chants. And it was really my kids who, they would be like, I don't want to, why are we doing this? I don't want to do this. And I would think, oh, it's because they don't like to sit still, or, oh, it's because they just want to be playing, or they don't understand what's being spoken, or whatever. And then, as they got older, the final straw for my oldest was, she made a PowerPoint presentation for me about why she didn't want to go to this particular church camp. And this coincided with a huge dream that I had in the middle of 2023, where I realized I was living a double life by staying an active member. And then right after I had the dream, she presents me with this PowerPoint presentation, and her like valid reasons, right? Like, I feel like everyone's sexist. They're constantly looking at my body and making comments about, am I covered up enough? Am I, abiding by the rules enough? And am I using, modest enough language and whatever? She's like, this isn't right. And then her brother was just receiving the priesthood, which only men can receive the priesthood. It's a high privilege in the Mormon church. And she's like, and I'm supposed to just like, what do I get? Like, what's my rite of passage? And it was kind of amazing. kind of all at one time, our whole family was brought to similar conclusion, and we all left at the same time.
Mm. Wow, that's an amazing story. I mean, I think yeah, like I said, we can relate to so much of it. We did have a similar point about that with another guest who basically had a similar experience that they left once they saw it through their children, and I think that
Mm.
that makes sense. And for Ace and I were just talking about this last time that as really just only a couple years ago we had lived our lives in the world as women, and so that's how we were socialized. And the idea, especially with religion, of deprive yourself, take care of everyone else before yourself. I just think that's really interesting to now have heard that story, that part of that story twice. Your story is, of course, incredibly unique. But that facet of it made it easier to see this from a different angle once you're seeing it through wanting to protect your children from these certain things. Because I think women put up with too much, but I just
Yep.
think that's an interesting part of the story. And I'm so proud of your kids for speaking up and being like, and it speaks to how well you've raised them too. Like, hey, these are sexist comments and we're not being treated equally. I think that's all wonderful.
We actually had some really good teachers, elementary school teachers too, who I fought with the whole time because I thought they were too, like, quote unquote liberal, um, bringing these ideas to my children or whatever. And nevertheless, this like cognitive dissonance inside of like, but a lot of that feels true, but it doesn't quite fit the box I'm in. And like,
Yeah.
my daughter and I were just talking about, there was one, Miss Christina, and she moved away, and I'm like, I can't wait till the day I see her again, because she'll be like, you what, you left? And like, she was so great with us, like she was so respectful, but at the end of the
Oh,
day, you knew that she was like, she also kind of felt sorry for us. Like,
yeah.
these poor people and these poor kids are in such a bubble. It kind of speaks to, I found this really fascinating when I heard it in the Mormon church. If you ask the women if they're oppressed, or if they're a second class citizen in the church, the women will all say no. But if you ask anybody outside of the Mormon church that knows an inkling or iota about the Mormon church, if the women are second class citizens, everyone says yes. And same thing with, being a cult, right? Like, when you're in a cult, you never say, yes, I'm in a cult. You have no idea you're in a cult. If you
Hmm.
did realize, you probably wouldn't keep doing it. It's not until
Yeah.
you're out of it to be able to say, oh, I was being totally brainwashed.
Mm.
So tell us a little bit about your perspective change since leaving the Mormon church and kind of coming to this new understanding and doing some critical thinking. What are some things that have changed in your lifestyle, how you view others, how you relate to other people? What does that look like for you today?
Well, there's a lot. There's like a whole lot, because Mormons control you down to your underwear. Like, there's Mormon underwear, like you're controlled down to every level. But I think what I'd love to speak to in this case, and especially regarding, my publishing and all of that, is um especially this year, I feel like I've been given experience after experience where I'm invited to a broader understanding of all humans and all walks of life. Um, I was so judgy, and I thought it was all love before, like, you're kind of taught that, like, Jesus equals like judgy love. Like, um recognizing recognizing now how much that judgment created a barrier to true connection with people, I'm like, I'm astounded. And I kind of feel like I'm playing catch up a little bit as a human being, because I'm like, oh my God, like, just this year, I put an inclusivity clause when we had a new hiring process. It was the first time I ever put an inclusivity clause in the job description. Like, you would think that's kind of like standard. Everybody knows to do that. It didn't even occur to me that, like, I lived in a white bubble surrounded by people who were pretty much white, conservative, Christian, heterosexual, like, it was, I didn't even realize I was so tone deaf and blind to like all of that. And I would think like, I wonder why I don't have more clients who are from different cultural backgrounds or, or whatever. Especially as an intimacy coach, I would outright say like, I don't know what it's like to be, gay or trans or something. I don't feel like I'm a good guide for that. And that's accurate. I'm sure I would have definitely done more harm than good. But like, did I even try? Did I even try to create, inclusive? No, I didn't. And I was so blind to that. So I feel like that is, and what a gift. Like, I'm not there right now. I'm in a big process of like basically redoing my community. It's interesting to see who stays and who goes as I talk about, embracing your erotic pleasure through embracing your Eros book project and stuff, like in ways that I had never spoken about it before and stuff. But I'm like, I can't wait until everybody around me is different than me and is like, I'm like, that's so fun. And so that's what we're doing. That's what I'm doing. And that's so nuanced because nobody I would have never said in the Mormon church that I was racist. I would have never said, well, I mean, that's also part of the problem, right? Is like, as a white woman of privilege, I should just own that I'm racist and I have invisible bias and I should be working on that. I also would have always said, oh no, we are so we're inclusive. I did so much studying about LGBTQ plus and the Mormon church because I was like, honestly always in pain about it. Like the cognitive dissonance, it just didn't feel right. It just felt like this doesn't seem right. And but I would read and read and read because I really wanted the church to be true. I wanted to have both things exist at the same time. And there's a lot of Mormon people who are gay but choose not to act on it because if they act on it, they lose privileges in the church. And there's a really high suicide rate for those people. And it's super sad. And I guess just realizing like that never felt like love. It really didn't. Yeah. So.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like I can relate to that. For the first 38 years of my life, I believed I was bad, wrong, broken, and sinful, and like tried to pray it away and tried to change and tried to live an upstanding life according to the Bible. And at the end of the day, like it just didn't align with my life experience and what I know to be true for me. And so stepping away from the faith was basically the only choice I could see fit because what they say is true just totally doesn't align with my lifestyle. And I think Marcus, you might feel similar to
Yeah, I can so relate to this, and I get kind of haunted thinking back to things that I believed growing up, and I've been dealing with a lot of heartache lately of my own parents not being accepting. But then it's like what I've realized lately, and not to get too political, but I think there are a lot of people that feel like they kind of lost their parents to either MAGA or QAnon, all these different things, and I had to kind of realize that like my family, like my parents were always homophobic. Like I was raised homophobic. That's what I was raised with from a very young age, and these different memories have been kind of cropping up from it. And I actually only recently realized when I was talking to a friend's mom, she was like, "Yeah, when it became legal in Connecticut in 2015, your dad wrote a thing in the newspaper against it." Like that's I didn't know that at the time, but it's so heartbreaking. But I had to kind of, I don't know, that helped me kind of compartmentalize it a little bit differently. Of like, this is just, oh, like they've had 6 decades to change their beliefs on this, and they haven't. So it it's terrible and it sucks in a lot of different ways. But I'm grateful that I split off. I'm grateful that I no longer believe what I used to believe, and but it's an uncomfortable thing. Of course, you wanna believe. There's also so much of this sunk cost fallacy. If you spent so much of your life in something and you so want it to be true, your brain is going to try to look for things that confirm it, not against it. So I'm curious about the other people in your life that it sounded like they were good positive influences for kind of maybe showing a little bit of the cracks, but at the same time I'm also because we had to spend so much of our time trying to recruit into Christianity, I'm so afraid of trying to, like, I don't want to be the kind of person that then just pokes at everyone else's belief system or tries to be like, you're in a cult, it's like, that's not how you do it.
Right.
I'm grateful for them in your life, and I like want to know how to do that better. But yeah, it's an uncomfortable thing to grow and change and realize that you don't believe the same things anymore. Kind of reevaluate. So I guess I'd also love to learn more about your journey as it relates to becoming that intimacy coach, because I think that's something that's really, really hard for women to feel like. I'll say we, as someone who lived in the world that way for a long time, are allowed our own pleasure and to know our own bodies for ourselves. I mean, especially nowadays, it feels like you literally cannot make decisions for your own body, depending on what state you're in. And so, coming to a place of sexual liberation where you can love yourself and become all the better of a partner because of it, and love other people better. I'd love to know anything you'd like to share about that, because often Christianity is very repressive from that category. And now to be someone that helps encourage people, I'd love to know anything you'd want to share.
Yeah, well, and this is always funny. Like, people get kind of confused when I tell my story, but I was an intimacy coach way before I left the Mormon church. So I was stirring the pot for a while. I got called into the stake president's office at one point because he said, I've gotten so many complaints. I had to do investigation and figure out like what people were talking about what you were posting and stuff like this. And I mean, at the time, you can imagine it was just extremely tame. But I was a leader for the young women, the teen girls, and different, pieces. So it was like, and they would add me on social media and stuff. So I had to unfriend all of them, which was super sad because I mean, I definitely was speaking to the like sacredness of sex and how beautiful it can be, how beautiful your pleasure can be, like all of these kinds of things that are really innate, beautiful elements of being human. So yeah, but my own journey to Eros, I mean, so much of it, like I feel like I'm kind of in a retelling of the story because it was so framed by our religion. I would usually tell a story that my husband's pornography addiction is what launched me into a healing process to try to understand what he was going through, to try to find my own joy separate and aside from him if he continued to choose his addiction and stuff. All of that is true, but it's sort of all like blurry now because it's like, and even as he looks back, and he's always been open for me to share about this and stuff, but even as he looks back, he's like, yes, it had become a true addiction. Like, but how much of that was perpetuated by the level of shame that was constantly being thrown at him? Like from the time he was like 9 years old, the talks about viewing pornography, for some reason, that's such a hot thing for Mormons. It's very like, it's so bad. And I think it's because it's so prevalent. The most porn is bought in the state of Utah. That's a real statistic. Highest porn subscription. And it's because they can hide it, It's like, I have all this repressed sexuality. So let me find a way to be about my kinks and my desires and in this whole virtual fantasy world, which does create real problems, right? If you're living in a fantasy world, it takes you away from your wife and your children, or your real life. And so it's really nuanced. I used to say, this is the one trial I'll never be grateful for. We almost divorced over it. I'm so glad we didn't. Because ultimately it was his kinky desires that led me to a like more liberated state after I like work through thinking that he was Satan himself and work through like literally all this stuff that we sometimes still have to revisit and have to hold with tenderness, because I was
Mm.
so freaking judgy to him. And he was like, I will be the knight in shining armor, and like jumping through every hoop possible to try to keep our marriage together, despite that he had these desires, you know. And finally one day, I mean, years of this, he started his, let's see, well, we separated in 2013. So years and years and years of being in 12-step addiction recovery program and everything for both of us. He ultimately came back to me and was like, you know, there's parts of this I still like I'm not addicted anymore. And like, there's something about this. And I'm like, I want to understand. Let me just drop all these barriers and just look at you as a human being and try to understand your desires. And really, initially, I was thinking like, what's missing in your life? Like, let me try and
Mm.
understand your desires so we can understand what's missing in your life. And, I think that was the first step for both of us to kind of stop using the church as a wedge between us.
Mm.
I, you know, the church talks about they're a church of families all the time. We are the church of families, as they talk about eternal families or whatever. And there was so much division and separation. And I've seen this with many of the couples that I worked with too, Mormon couples, where the church was actually the wedge in between, but they can't see it.
Mm-hmm.
Totally blind to like what the issue is. It's like, oh, well, I have all these judgments and stuff that prevent me from just being with your vulnerabilities or being with your raw, naked desires, or just being with you as a human being that maybe doesn't want to live this lifestyle or doesn't want to be the next bishop or prophet or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, yeah, I now say that was the most beautiful thing that ever happened to us. Despite what you may or may not feel about porn, like I definitely see that it's also a nuanced space, right? There's pros and
Mm-hmm.
cons, and there's people benefiting greatly from it in good ways and bad ways. There's people who are getting hurt a lot in the industry as well. And I'm like
Mm-hmm.
super aware of all the nuance. And nevertheless, this created something really beautiful for us to finally start having a dialogue around our desires and like
Mm.
um it's just amazing. And when we finally started putting ourselves in places among people who weren't afraid, sex positive communities, people who weren't afraid of their desires, it was like we were welcomed with such open arms. And I was, you know, this first experience, it was part of the erotic blueprints, which is Ace is a coach with and stuff. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I am now in an LGBTQ plus like friendly space, and I feel the most loved and accepted immediately,
Mm.
unjudged, like come as you are. It was like hard because I was like, I have judged these people my whole life, and now it's like, welcome, like, welcome home.
People don't know what they're missing.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Aw.
so I think I'm still in a little bit of a redefinition phase. I have 1 to 2 clients at a time right now for intimacy coaching, and I can help people with their immediate desires, but to be able to put something out there and say, this is now what I stand for, I'm just like, I'm still becoming all over again.
Mm-hmm. But I think that's a beautiful part of this, and something that we learn as we leave religion is it's okay to not have all the answers and to not have it figured out, because there's so much. And you said something before I want to come back to. You said having insurance on life, and I love that, because I think like religion gives us this false sense of we have all this safety, this structure, these rules. I think for myself, I would have like loved to go into the military because it just would have been someone else to tell me what to do all the time. Like I was very much
Right.
raised to like that structure. What's my next medal? Not that I, am demeaning anyone in the military or how hard it is to get those accreditations. I just mean that structure would have been something that worked really well for me because of how I was raised in the church. So I love that idea of the insurance on life, this false sense of security, making it all the harder to leave from. But I do think it kind of gives this arrogance of like, we know as much as we need to know. We got it all figured out. And so when you leave that behind, and even like you said about publishing, like the more I learned I didn't know. And that
Yeah.
could be really overwhelming and scary. But I think that's also, a good sign. And it's something I'm experiencing too, is like I feel like I feel very emotionally vulnerable these days, but I think that's because I spent so much of my life feeling like I wasn't allowed to have emotions, or that was a weakness, or I had to
Right.
be tough. I had to just compartmentalize the emotion and keep working and keep busy. And one of our other guests was like, oh yeah, that's a Protestant thing, that productivity is really, so I could so relate to that. So the fact that I sometimes just feel like I feel a lot of emotions and I don't know what to do with them is so uncomfortable, but I think it's a good sign, So, but one thing I loved as you were sharing your story, I want to ask if you feel like you have a better handle on understanding your own life now that you work in storytelling as like your, a big part of your world. Do you think that makes it easier for you to look back on your own story and make meaning and find out how this thing that was a difficulty ended up being one of the best moments? Do you think that helps with how you analyze your own life?
I'm so grateful for this question because, yeah, I do. And I hadn't thought of that before. Because people come to me and they're like, I get a lot of like, I don't know if my story is valuable or, that
Mm.
kind of, and I kind of now from where I sit, I'm like, what? Anyone could tell me any story. And I'm like, wait, but what about that part? And like, what did you do there? And I find value. So
Aw.
yeah, I think so. I'm really, really grateful for that question. And I think too, because when we can, typical therapy will tell you this, like when we can weave a solid narrative, like stringing the pearls on a necklace, and we can now say, okay, this happened, and as a result this happened, and it brings us a sense of of peace, which is
Mm-hmm.
why a lot of times in like the coaching industry, we're talking about how do we rewrite that story, because sometimes we find peace in a story that's not even true or helping us or serving us,
Yeah.
and we're like operating from like less than true, a less than true story,
Mm-hmm.
but nevertheless simply having the beads all together is really
Mm-hmm.
helpful, and I think it helps with those really vulnerable moments. I mean, I just had a date like 3 days ago where I reached out to a friend and I'm like, I mean, it's amazing how quick you can go from like deep gratitude to like, is there any point to even being here? I mean,
Yeah.
God, when you leave a religion like that, right? It's like, and I was having all these thoughts and I'm like, I'm so grateful I've learned to recognize suicidal ideation as like not my norm. So then I can kind
Mm-hmm.
of take a step back and go, oh, whoa, I'm doing a thing. What's what's happening here?
Yeah.
And I realized it was just super deep grief. And I think, yeah, again, being able to weave your story around all of that is really, really helpful when you have those dark, dark moments. Because then you can just, oh, like I'm feeling grief. I'm actually feeling the uncertainty,
Yeah.
and, or I'm craving the certainty that I used to have or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I do have in the links that I shared with you guys, I have a story code activation workbook that would help anybody listening if you're kind of like, oh, I'm definitely rewriting my story, or I want to have a stronger narrative or a peaceful narrative in my story. It goes through so many facets of that: your past, your present, your future, how to like weave a story that brings in what you want in your life, and even using your dreams to identify like the power in your story.
I love that. We'll definitely share resources. I was also going to say, I just listened to the book again. It's The Gap and the Gain. They talk a lot about how, like, you can always feel like you're never enough if you're just focused on an ideal. But if you measure backwards, then you can see your progress, how far you've come. And they talk a lot about, like, just basically sort of rewrite those memories in a way that's going to help you and be constructive. But it sounds like you're also really great at helping pull that out of other people and finding value in their stories. Because I think it is hard, especially when there, however many billions of people on the internet, to feel like, well, my story matters. Like, you want to hear what weird thing happened to me, and like that this crazy thing happened in my childhood. I struggle a lot with feeling like I have anything really worth saying in that department. But how
Right.
much have I benefited from reading other people's stories, that they put the effort
Right.
to writing down and editing and publishing and sharing and advertising. So I love that you're able to help facilitate that for other people.
Thank
We'll,
you.
we'll definitely link it down below. I know we have a hard stop, so any final thoughts that either of you want to throw in here as we wrap up?
I'm just super grateful for the opportunity to be interviewed on your guys' podcast. And it is another one of those moments of like, welcome. You're totally welcome here. And I'm like, I was a judgy hoe for a long time. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's super beautiful. Like nobody, I think because when you come from Christianity, you think, well, I'll probably have to go get crucified or like mounted on a pyre first, and then I'll be welcomed. Like I got to do some serious repenting for this. Like,
Yeah.
and really people are just like,
Punishment.
we're just glad you came down
Yeah.
to the human side.
Welcome. Yeah. Yeah, I see other people's humanity. Well, thank you so much for being here. And so this is a work in progress, yes, the work that you're doing together?
Yes.
So we'll keep people posted. We'll get to hear highlights because Ace isn't going anywhere. So we'll get to hear more about the process. But we're right on time here. So thank you so much to you both for being here. We'll link plenty of good resources down below, and we'll catch up with everyone on the next episode of Wholly Unapologetic.